every time I feel uncomfortable, I'm already thinking about the reward, and I move through the craving for the reward, and then I go to the behavior. The first thing I want to do is share with you a story that I read in The Guardian a couple of days ago. And it really struck a chord for me because it made me reflect on neuroscience, on habit formation, on our lifestyles, and basically our culture. And where are we going in our personal lives within this culture? The fellow who wrote the story was an anthropologist who worked for about 20 years in the Kalahari Desert in Africa, studying the bush people there. And he lived with them. He later went on and applied with De Boer's diamonds in the late 90s and ended up working his way up to becoming CEO of De Boer's before the recession in 2009. So he had this, experience of a very primitive lifestyle, and then moved to Belgium, lived a high life, jet setting, and looking after a major corporation. He later left De Boer's in about 2013 and now has his own company where he coaches senior executives on lifestyle in a way. What I wanted to share with you was that we haven't always been the way we are now. In fact, the Kalahari Bush people are from our first epoch, how we lived as hunters and gatherers all over the planet for about 190,000 years before the start of agriculture. And when he was living with the Kalahari Bush people, what he noticed is their average work week to procure firewood, water, take care of their shelters, and get food was about 15 hours. 15 hours of work a week. Communal, cooperative work. So, I've always thought it was about 4.5 hours a day, but they were working about 3 hours a day. Of course, some days they might not have had the luxury of a lot of food, and other days they might have killed a beast and then feasted a bit. So there was kind of an up and down, you could say, through their lifestyle in terms of what we would consider might consider to be hardships. But what this fellow noticed is these people didn't suffer. In fact, they were a lot happier than he was. They were a hell of a lot happier than his family was back in Belgium. These people spent a lot of time telling stories, daydreaming, sitting around a fire, or just leaning under acacia bush and just hanging out in the shade. And then they would go do some tasks and then come back and tell some more stories and spend some time alone, and sometimes in little groups and sometimes as a bigger group around the fire at night. But basically, they didn't have anything. They didn't own anything. They had no possessions other than their clothes and their gathering tools and their hunting tools. They didn't accumulate anything because they were slightly nomadic. So they couldn't haul around, gel screen TVs, for example, because, well, there was no place to plug them in, for one, but they didn't have the accoutrements that we struggle to get. And these people, he felt, were really, really comfortable in themselves and really, really comfortable with each other and really basically happy. He looked into their values, and what he found out after spending 2 years or more with them, well, no, more like 20 years, is basically these people had a super strong agreed upon value. There was no hierarchy. There was no status. There was no competitiveness. If one hunter got a piece of an animal and 3 other hunters didn't, that animal was shared. Everything was shared. There was no segregation to self away from the rest of the people. There was no me at the expense of others. Everybody basically You were shunned if you were selfish. That's the bottom line. They had a completely different worldview and completely different culture than the one that we've created since the Industrial Revolution. Well, really, it started when we moved into cities after agriculture became our main format of getting our food. Once we moved into cities, we created governments, we created hierarchies, we created status, we created accumulation. And from that point on to now, we've put ourselves into a lot of unhappiness, ironically. The reason I wanted to share this story with you is because I want to talk about happiness before we talk about habits. I want to have you just think about what it truly is, the times or the things you do or the state of being that you have where you feel really content, really relaxed, basically happy with your life. Now, I've done a lot of research on this, and basically, most researchers see our particular epoch, our particular society and culture as being in a hedonic treadmill. We work really, really hard, longer than humans have ever worked, accumulate income, and then we buy things or we travel, and we pull into us things so that we can feel content, happy, stable, secure, and we end up not being that way. The true places where we end up having pleasure, real pleasure, is when we take the time to savor something. And that could be seeing a sunflower, 7-foot sunflower growing in somebody's yard and just going, wow, that's so beautiful. Or it could be something that we're eating or drinking or listening to or watching. But the trick is to savor. And savor is the first step of mindfulness. It means slowing down enough to just be completely present and just experience something fully with our senses. That's actually rare in our culture because we're so on the go. We're so moving from one experience to the next that we rarely take the time to fully, deeply savor and then fully drop into joy with that experience. And this is something that the people in the Kalahari did. They were so slow. Everything was way stretched out and dropped out. They savored everything. Everything was beautiful all the time. Everything was constantly changing, and that change was itself enriching and rewarding. The second aspect of deep, deep happiness that researchers find is a state called flow. When we're in, going back to the Kalahari Bush people, when they're moving through the bush and the grassland, they're completely in all of their senses. They're in the minute, moment to moment shifting of noticing smells and scents and sounds and feelings on their skin, because for their life's sake, they had to be. They had to be utterly present in the present moment in what they were doing, or they would get eaten or starve. So most of their life was in a state of deep presence when they savored things, but also when they did things. So they did do things, and they were in a state of being that we call flow while they did them. And this puts us present in our body, in our senses, and in our mind. And this is the best state to be in when we want to be creative, or when we want to grow, or we want to learn. And it takes tremendous amount of warriorship for all of us to make little pieces of our life have that state happen. Even making a meal and being creative with it, or having creative pursuits, or gardening, or being super present in a conversation with a friend, we can be in a state of flow. We can't be in a state of flow if our mind or our emotions are bubbling up and taking us away, or our devices are interrupting us and giving us all kinds of beeps and buzzes and peeps that are distracting us. Right now, one of the 4 biggest challenges for mental health in our culture are distraction, because of the inundation of our communication devices, loneliness, and this is really prevalent now with COVID, as you're all feeling, I'm sure, negative self-talk, which the Kalahari Bush people, they just don't have that. It's not even in their lexicon to even talk internally negatively about themselves, because they have this group hold of this small little tribe where everybody is just constantly touching and in love and helping each other and supporting each other and looking after different kids and looking after elders and all of that constantly. So the loneliness and negative self-talk are basically non-existent according to this anthropologist, the CEO of De Boers. The last of the four components that seem to be the biggest causes of harm for our mental well-being in our culture is loss of meaning and purpose. Now, the Kalahari Bush people's meaning and purpose was, of course, to survive. But in that survival, they had this rich right hemisphere brain tied to sort of an awe about the world. They saw the supernatural in lightning storms. They saw their ancestors in the constellations at night in a campfire. Everything was held in a context that allowed them to feel comfortable about the natural world and the extended universe, and they felt a part of it, and they knew their purpose was to take care of their young and take care of their old and work together in a selfless way for the best interest of all. And they had deep, full, rich, playful, and creative lives. So now I want to switch us over and talk about, and this is just one little habit I wanted to, Alex and I wanted to bring up because it's such a common one in our culture, is what do we do after work to feel better? We're working, again, longer than anybody. Now we're working alone a lot, and that's difficult for loneliness. And we're sometimes not working in jobs where we're getting a lot of satisfaction, where it may not even be in line with our sense of context or purpose. We may have to find those alignments outside of work. So then work becomes even a little bit more stressful and difficult. If we take all of those components and get to the end of the day, like right now at happy hour, most of us fall back into habits that make us relax or feel comfortable or feel less lonely or less bored or less depleted. And some of those choices end up not being in the best service of our purpose, of our loneliness, of our relationships, of our self-care. I want to talk about the options of how do we choose differently. We can choose differently behaviorally, which is the way the Mount Trek has always talked about how to best support habit formation. If we want to create a new action or eliminate an old action, what are the strategies that you can do to make that have the best success? But I also want to go a little deeper and tie back to the Kalahari Bush people and ask ourselves, existentially really, what do we do when we're discomforted? If we're exhausted at the end of the workday, or we feel lonely or bored or upset or depleted or any of the feelings that are uncomfortable, what are the options we have with that? Do we go for carb, fat, salt? Because we can, and that links us to certain habits. And we go for the carb, fat, salt, and we get the reward of an emotional mental shift of the current situation. We resolve a problem in a way, which is unhappiness or dissatisfaction or discomfort, and we get the comfort of the neurotransmitters of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin if we have chips and guacamole and a glass of wine. It's the biophysical neural connection that we have from our tongue to our brain for our survival, but it can turn into a habit, a mindless habit, where we end up having to move out of the state we're in constantly to look for some form of pleasure or comfort. And if we're in that state, we're not present. We can't be in a flow state. It's hard to connect truly to ourselves or others if we're in habit. If we're in presence, in a flow state, if we're in mindfulness, then we have access to deeper resonant experiences. You don't get them from habit. Now, we could talk about replacing wine and guacamole with doing something creative, or petting your new pet, like Simone and Wendy, or going for a walk in nature and being in your senses for a nature bath or forest bathing, or maybe doing a little yoga at the end of the workday, putting the mind and body in the present moment in presence, or meditating, or rock climbing, or anything where you put yourself in presence will give you the same feel-good hormones internally, bathing your brain, that the guacamole, chips, and wine give us. And we all know this. If you've been to Mountain Trek before, we've talked about it. But I want to talk about where in this cycle of habit formation here can we interject another opportunity? Because we all know how hard it is once we get into a habit, and the habit gives us pleasure and takes us away from discomfort, to break that habit. And we all know how difficult it is to start a completely new habit. The next level below that is to shift our relationship to discomfort. You all know how discomforting it can be to work out in the gym, and how you can hit a wall of discomfort, but then all of a sudden you go over it, and your strength training starts to pay off, or your cardiovascular fitness starts to pay off, or you're starting to get longer muscles and you feel more comfortable in your posture. All of those changes to our body also have discomfort with them. But when we have discomfort, habitually the egoic state of our mind will go like this. I'm not going back to the gym, or I don't like that conversation with that person, I'm not going to talk to them anymore, or any number of things, because basically discomfort means we're not in control. Discomfort means we're at the mercy of what's going on around us. And discomfort puts us a little bit close to our fear, our greatest fear, which is death. Every time we bump into discomfort, we just touch into our fear of death. And I want to talk to you about a perspective of having relationship with that fear, with that ultimate fear, that can liberate us by allowing us to just stay with discomfort a little bit. So say I come home from the end of the workday and I'm depleted, or I'm feeling lonely, or I feel exhausted, or I feel like I even want a reward for how hard I worked. If I can just take a moment and just notice it, and just sit just for a moment, maybe 2 breaths, and become curious and go, I wonder what's causing me to feel exhausted or lonely, or having a need for a reward. I wonder what's up with that. I wonder what's at the root of that. No judgment, just a little bit of curious introspection. Then I'm going to take another deep breath, and I'm just going to be with it. Go. You know, I used to watch my father come home from work all my life, and the first thing he would do is go into the living room and have a beer and read the newspaper. None of us kids were allowed to go and bother him. That was his reward for working and commuting, and I adopted that for many years. That was my go-to when I came home from a day of work, just not even consciously. It was to have a beer and relax and feel rewarded. And I also got the dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin to fully get the reward, and a shift from maybe some exhaustion and stress. I can just feel that and still not do anything about it. And I can notice where the craving is and what the craving is attached to, just with curiosity. I'm craving that beer. Oh, maybe it's just an old habit from childhood. Or maybe I'm under blood sugared and I should get working on dinner. Or maybe I'm just thirsty, but I'm used to just having beer. There could be all kinds of reasons why I make the choice I do. But once it's a habit, it's not even a choice. It's basically autopilot. The next question or thing I would do is ask myself a question. Okay, if having this beer is a habit and it may or may not be serving me, what are other alternatives could I use to get the need I have? The need to feel a little bit better, the need to resource myself more, either calorically or hydration, the need to socialize or the need to relax. What are other options could I have? Because if I ask myself that question, then I'm not going to just pick a should, like I'm going to stop having guacamole and wine after work and I'm going to go work out. Why? Why should I do that? Yes, I could get some endorphins, but am I really clear that that's exactly what I need? Working out when I'm exhausted may not be the best time at that particular time of the day. Maybe I do need to relax. Maybe I do need to just go and have a hot bath with Epsom salts and some lavender drops and just take some time to myself to relax after the day. Or go for a walk with my pooch or my loved one. But it's worth asking the question rather than going to the fallback loop of habit. And this is where we get to get really clear about needs and make choices that are true for us. Because the more we choose to do something different that really resonates with us, that we've had some introspection about, the more it aligns with our values, the more potency it has. Rather than just saying, I should do this or I should do that. Those things never last. They're not anchored to something resonant within us. Come with me over to the board for a second. The cue for any habit, one that we want to have or one that we want to let go of, is based on time, people, place, prompting, like a beep or a buzz, and emotion. A lot of the emotion that we feel at the end of the workday tends to be the cue that makes us crave something. Now, the thing that we crave comes all the way back to here, to the reward. If I want to feel better, the reward is going to be something that gives me the feel-good hormones. Even a glass of wine, if I just had a glass of wine that was non-alcohol and non-sugar, basically I'm not going to get dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Petting my pet for 5 minutes can give me dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. But so does the wine and guacamole. If the reward gives us the feel-good hormone, the loop gets cemented. Then every time I feel uncomfortable, I'm already thinking about the reward and I move through the craving for the reward and then I go to the behavior. The behavior would be going to the cupboard and uncorking the wine and pouring it and getting out the chips and the guacamole, sitting down and relaxing and having a snack. And don't get me wrong, Mountain Trek isn't against that, or is not against any of this stuff. But if you're considering that maybe you're doing it more frequently than you want, then this is what this little sharing is about. This is about getting out of habit and getting awake and creating a different relationship to the discomfort that we might have so that we can make another choice. You might still want to have wine and guacamole 5 nights of the week, but maybe 2 nights of the week, you might want to do something different. And for that to happen, you have to be able to have that noticing, that reflection, that alignment to values of taking care of yourself in your best interest, and then choosing something that resonates for you. If it doesn't resonate for you, you're not going to stick to it. So some of you might live close to a park, so going for a walk in nature might become the new behavior, the new action that you want to habituate. And in doing it, you get the reward of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Others might pet an animal. Others might start playing the piano when they get home from work. Others might do some restorative yoga. All of those things give you the same benefit in terms of shifting the inner space and in the state of being with those same feel-good hormones. But now you're choosing them not by running away from the uncomfortable feelings. You're noticing the uncomfortable feelings. You're asking yourself where they're coming from. You're asking yourself about the habitual way of how you used to respond to that discomfort. And then you're choosing something that might enrich you more and round out your life more. So first, we have discomfort. Could be thought, emotion, physical. The discomfort ultimately wants a changed state. It wants to be happy. It wants pleasure. It does not want pain. But to get straight to this pleasure, we have to do something. So we create a craving, and it could be for the wine and the guac, or whatever it is, your penchant, doesn't matter. The craving for the wine and guac and pleasure takes us down into the response or the behavior or the action that then gives us the pleasure. This is the loop. And this is the basic loop that works for our brain for all habits, ones that we want and ones we don't want. Even if I wanted to create a new habit, say I wanted to pet my animal after work one day a week just as a break from wine and guacamole, I'm still going to potentially be discomforted at the end of the workday. I might just sit with that for a moment and notice and start to figure out why I'm discomforted. Am I working too hard? Am I working with people that I don't feel comfortable with? Am I not taking breaks enough? Am I getting enough calories in during the day? You've got to drop in and find out what's not working out for you for that. And then I know I want to feel better, but maybe instead of jumping to past cravings and behaviors, I'm going to think about a new behavior. But I still need to have the craving for it. The craving of petting my cat or dog is that I feel a lot of, my heart opens up. I feel a lot of care. I don't feel alone. I end up feeling warm and fuzzy inside, just like they feel warm and fuzzy on the outside. And that's legit and real. And that can become a craving to a new behavior that gets us the same need met. Now, I wouldn't want you to think that every time we feel discomfort that we should chase pleasure, because that's the loop that we're all doing because of the fear of death. The step in between this mechanical behavioral model is to stay with this for a moment, to just notice and be with it. Be in your being. Become curious. Become brave to just stay a little moment longer with a couple of breaths in a state of uncertainty, in a state of groundlessness, a state of discomfort. Because the truth is, that's the way it is out here in the world, outside of our human world. In nature, nothing's predictable. Weather's not predictable. Seasons aren't predictable. What animals do isn't predictable. We try to figure it all out, but really everything's moving and changing constantly. And that uncertainty of what's going to happen next is really hard for us, for our sense of security and safety in the world. And it gets our egoic mind kind of worked up into a state of discomfort. So the more we practice being and feeling this without just knee-jerking, just being careful, conscious, curious, the more we get used to the way the world really is, and the less fear we have about living or dying, because they're all both just part of life. I'll open it up to questions.
Hey, Kirk,
Alex, has anybody got any thoughts or questions?
I have one myself. So that framework that you drew up, would it be a good exercise to go through that in our current habits? So like the example we've stuck with, the cue is coming home and being exhausted and expressing or feeling some discomfort, and then the craving is the wine and guac. Would it be good to do that on our own and physically write it out for some of our current habits, and then
Absolutely.
subsequently do a second one of ideal habits or habits that we're trying to create?
Yeah. And it works again for ones that we are coping with, and we don't want to shift them and don't want them, and new ones we want to build. Absolutely. So this this works all the time for everybody. And if I took one of them out, a habit won't happen. A habit can only happen with all four of these components: a cue, a craving, an action, and a reward. If I took away the reward, then I'm not going to do the habit.
And something that we've talked about before that I always think on is these cues are subconscious, and it's hard for us to be aware of these cues. But even something like writing down this template, this matrix that you have, and putting it on your fridge if you go for a beer, or on the cabinet if you go for a wine, to make yourself aware.
Well, when we get curious here about the cues, and the cues aren't just emotional all the time, they can be about people. So maybe whenever my friend Bill calls me to go have a visit with him, we always go for beers. It's just our habit. I might not even want a beer, but it's just what we do. So people can be a cue, place can be a cue. So if there's a plate of chocolate chip cookies down on the kitchen counter, and I'm going by that kitchen counter, that's definitely going to be a cue. Time is also a cue. So, you know, the 8:30 Ben and Jerry's that I had to work through, or again, after work, like we're talking about right now, that's a cue. And then lastly, preceding events is a cue. Now, this can work positive and negative. So a preceding event could be disturbing. We don't feel comfortable. And so we go for some kind of craving for a reward and an action to get us there. Or it can be a positive one. Like a preceding event could be me brushing and flossing, and then that always leads me to doing my evening yoga before bed. So knowing these cues can serve us as well, both directions. They help us get free from habits that we want to change and help us build new habits. Does that make sense, Alex?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can we manifest positive cues then with little triggers?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, we had that one talk where we were saying,
well, some research says that if you want to make a new habit, it's always good to align it to a new location.
Exactly what I was just gonna. Well, I was gonna say that the habit that you were talking about, aligning it with the previous one, like brushing your teeth.
Yeah, that's called stacking. So stacking time, those link together, and then that new habit has much more traction because you've already habituated brushing your teeth. And say you wanted to start doing, say I do my yoga before I go to bed at night, I always go to the same spot in the house to do it. So sanctifying a location for something new, or getting a gym pass to a particular gym and going when we're able to do that, that location can become now the cue for that new habit. So time, people, location, emotion, previous event, or prompts, as in, you know, all of the devices that we get for prompts. And that's why putting things into our calendar with an alert that prompts us to do a new action that we want to habituate is a great cue. That's a powerful cue for me to like I used to use it to tell me to go brush and floss at 7:30 so that I wouldn't eat Ben and Jerry's at 8:30. So that little pop up on my phone saying go floss and brush was a great way to build a prompt cue for me to make a change. I think Simone had a question I saw it pop up.
Yeah, I do. Would you like me to?
Yeah.
Okay. So what if the habit isn't tangible, like you were saying, the wine, beer, guacamole, and it's just some negative psychological habit, anxiety, or, how do you work
The
on that?
reason why I brought up the story about the Kalahari Bush people and the reason why I talked about death is because the relationship we have to change, ultimately the biggest will be dying. We all know we're going there. We just don't know when, is the root of anxiety. Our society is death phobic and we don't have a relationship with it anymore. We don't mourn and wail and wash bodies. Everything's just sterilized away from us in terms of death. And it's even worse right now with COVID. We don't even get to say goodbye to loved ones, unfortunately, in this terrible situation. And so it creates even more phobia and doubt and fear. And it's at the bottom line, base level foundation of all of our anxiousness. The fear of what's coming next. The uncertainty of what's around the corner, whether it's about our job, our employment, our health, our kids, anything. So it's really worth building a relationship to that. And one of the most powerful ways to build a relationship to change, which is then close to knowing that there's going to be change about our lives and ultimately a passing, is meditation. Because if we sit with ourselves and we notice the thoughts and the emotions that arise when we just sit, we see that there's constant change, constant production, and rising and falling constantly. And then we get used to it. It's just that we're not used to it because we jump so much from one thing to the next just to stay out of discomfort. Mm-hmm. Did that answer your question, Simone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
It's an edge that we all have to start growing into as we get older. We have to start growing into feeling comfortable with just being with what is, with uncertainty, like right now, with the economy, with the COVID, with everything. This whole situation right now is throwing us into this place, whether we like it or not. We are face to face with uncertainty. We don't know whether it's going to get worse or get better, whether it's going to be a vaccine or not. It's just completely day to day for us all. And in truth, that's the way life is all the time. But we've had this illusion that we could compartmentalize and forecast and keep everything controlled and contained. And then we forgot that that's not really the way life is.
Well, we could at least escape and do things, and now we can't really so much.
Exactly. So we're now stuck with having to face those difficult feelings and uncertainties, which is good for our growth ultimately. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah, thank you, Kirk.
My pleasure, Simone.
Kirk, we've got another question. So if we learn to sit with discomfort and we're able to redirect our response with something positive, will that extinguish the bad habit eventually?
If we learn to sit with discomfort and then at the same time be curious, like kind and curious, and just say, wow, I'm actually feeling this day to day, this discomfort about the end of my workday for some particular reason. And that kind of really opens things up, like, am I doing the right thing? Well, that just, I don't even want to go there. Those are scary fear thoughts that we have that keep us from making change and making growth. And we stay on that hedonic treadmill of just chasing pleasure to just cope with what's going on in our life. And so if we can bring curiosity into the discomfort place and just ask ourselves, I wonder why. And again, the next day, oh, I wonder why. And then we get a little illumination, a little insight that can then give us the power and the motivation and fuel and value alignment to then choose something different. But just choosing something different because we should only drink wine and guacamole 5 nights a week, not 7. And I should be doing more exercise, so I should go do that on those 2 days. Those are shoulds. And unfortunately, all neuroscience shows that they don't stick. It's when we align with it, with our values, after we've done some settling in and introspection around what's going on, then we pick and choose something that's relevant and something that brings us pleasure in doing it, so that we're not suffering by having to do it. This isn't about suffering more. This isn't about drinking wine less and eating less guacamole and chips so you all have to suffer more. This is about finding what's underneath the suffering so we get clear about it and why it's making us choose behaviors we are doing. And then once we get that insight, asking ourselves, what else could bring that change of state for me that maybe supports my whole being more? And I'm not saying go cold turkey or anything and stop the previous wine and guacamole, but maybe just mix it up, experiment, play with it. Because when we're doing habit, we're not free. When 47% of our life is in habit, some of it's supportive and some of it isn't. But that's 50% almost of our life when we're not present, when we're not curious, when we're not noticing anything, when we're just in autopilot. That's half of our life, not free.
So Kirk, having this curiosity to explore this discomfort is critical. And like you were saying, being on autopilot, it's often easy for us to get 2 glasses of wine in and a whole bag of chips and some guac before we even realize what's happened.
Yeah.
You mentioned a phone alarm, and maybe we set that at 5:30 or 7 or whenever it is we typically get home, and that gets us thinking immediately and curious immediately. What other tips could we offer that are methods to even instigate that curiosity to recognize discomfort?
There's a 5-question mindfulness methodology that I like to use. So I'm going towards the fridge to get my Chardonnay, and I pull it out of the fridge. And before I take the cork off, I ask myself, is this really what I need right now? And that question just breaks the trance and allows me to go, is this a need or a want? And then my second question would be, what am I feeling or thinking right now? And I drop into it with a breath and I go, I'm just feeling compressed for my workday, but I want to go a little deeper. So I ask it a second time and I go, I'm actually feeling really alone with all that I'm responsible for. And I'm going to go one more layer in the onion down. I'm going to ask that same question a third time. Am I feeling anything else? And I notice, yeah, I'm actually feeling sad that I'm alone with all that I'm holding. Now, the last question is similar to the first. If this isn't a need, what is it that I really need? What do I really need right now where I'm feeling sad and alone and compressed? Or maybe I need to go pet my best friend, furry friend in the house, or maybe I call up my best friend and go for a social distance walk to talk about what's going on for me at work. And I don't even need to go and do that right now. But by just asking myself those 5 questions, the wine pouring into my glass is broken from being autopilot. I can still pour the glass of wine and I can still enjoy it. And when I'm going to put it in my mouth, I'm going to savor it. It's not going to gulp. I'm going to let it just fully bathe my tongue with the 5 taste buds. And I'm going to go sensually deep with it and just feel all the movement in my mouth and the bouquet erupting through my olfactory system. And I might even be pairing it with a guacamole and chip and just noticing the contrast. As soon as I'm present and noticing, I'm no longer in habit. I might do that 3 times before I phone my friend and go for a walk and a talk. But at least I won't be doing it habitually. And I do the same thing when I go to pour the second glass. Because so many times I've drank in my wine on my second glass, I don't even taste it. It just becomes like kind of, I'm not connected to it. And those 5 questions allow me to stay connected without criticism, without self-guilt or shame that I'm drinking that wine, with full pleasure, full savoring enjoyment. It's just a different relationship to the same behavior. So those 5 questions would be, I'm feeling discomfort, I'm craving wine and guacamole, I'm opening the fridge and I'm pulling out the wine. That's my behavior. And then before I pour it, I'm just going to take, what did that take? Like a minute and a half to ask myself those 5 questions. And I can still have the wine. It's just that it won't be habit anymore. And I'll want to experiment with finding a way to get my need met rather than just going for a change from discomfort to pleasure.
Kirk, something that I think about is it's a habit in its own right to be able to draw upon these 5 questions. And it takes mindfulness, and that takes its own practice. So almost at a more rudimentary level, would you recommend like printing these 5 questions and putting them on the bottle of wine or on that bag or whatever that is?
Any, you get your sticky notes and you stick it on the fridge with any kind of intention or prompt. All of that helps. Those are great tools to help us in this quest for getting free. Totally, nothing wrong with any of that.
And the end goal would be that we do so many of those practices that then becomes a skill.
Yes, and the most powerful practice ultimately is meditation. Now, we've had talks about this before in other health talks. We can do, Headspace or Calm or some of these guided meditation tools with apps that are great for helping us relax and get into a rest and digest parasympathetic nerve state. But what it doesn't do, in a way, is keep us sitting in a state where we have to be with what is. And that's bumping into discomfort again. So if I just sit and concentrate on the breath moving in and out of my nostril, or on a candle flame, or the sound of an ocean wave, and I'm concentrating, I'm going to notice pretty quickly that concentration gets broken by a thought that arises. It's just the way that mind works. And if we just give ourselves 5 minutes a day at the beginning or end of the day, some place that we sanctify just for us to make this exercise, this part of our brain where we practice concentration in this world when we're so distracted, we start to practice living with what arises in our own self. Our thoughts and the feelings arise and they interrupt our concentration, but we just stay with it for just 5 minutes, and then maybe 6 months later, you're up to 7 minutes, and maybe you like it so much after a year, you're getting just a bit more space between thoughts and more peace and calm, that you do it for 15 minutes. Don't jump to an hour on your first go. But that practice changes the brain. It changes neural pathways. It sets us up to bring mindfulness into brushing our teeth. It brings mindfulness into savoring the flavors that we put into our mouth. It brings mindfulness into petting our pet. We're really present with it. We're not we're not thinking about other responsibilities or concerns or anxious thoughts about the future or desires that things could have been different in the past. We're right there present. And the most powerful tool practice is to just practice 5 minutes of concentration meditation a day. And then we get used to being with ourselves. We get to see that we actually have a pretty crazy mind. And it's okay. All of us have it. And we have thoughts and feelings that bubble up. And that's completely human. There's no betterness that we're trying to be. We're just practicing being with ourselves in the rising and falling of circumstances and events in our lives. And it'll get richer. There's more savoring, there's more pleasure, there's deep pleasure and joy and deep connection, present connection. And it's so worth it. And we're free. We get freer and freer. I hope that gives you some food for thought, folks, because it is the next level to not just go for behavior change. All research now out of MIT, Harvard, all the latest research on addiction and on habit formation all come down to mindfulness. This isn't just the newest fad on the block. This has been practiced by human beings for thousands and thousands of years. And it builds us, we change neural pathways by changing the way we work with our mind. So if you're having a glass of wine tonight, enjoy it. No guilt, no second thoughts, but be fully present and really, really savor it and enjoy it. And then if you find you want to do something different once in a while, be curious and experiment. Life is an experiment. It's a chance to learn and grow and become more free.
Thanks, Kirk.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Have a great evening, everybody. If you have any questions, or again, if anyone wants to have a little half-hour chat about any of this with me, just sign up for, we have a free chat. If you want to have a check-in about habit formation or about your health or anything, I'm available Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.